Thank you very much to give me such a wonderful chance to make a speech for you. And I'm not good at speaking English, of course, hearing English too. So I want to read the manuscript. I work at the psychiatric department of a university's hospital and treat patients with psychiatric problems every day. My specialty in psychiatry is referred to as Adolescent Psychiatry, dealing with disorders such as eating disorders, represented by bulimia nervosa and anorexia nervosa, borderline personality disorders characterized by unstable mood and interpersonal relationships, and social withdrawal that has been increasingly diagnosed in recent years, attracting a great deal of public attention. Symptoms in these adolescents vary, but these disorders develop in the presence of psychological fragility as a background. In treatment, psychiatrists are required to potentially deal with their difficulties in life. When talking to young patients with various psychiatric disorders, I sometimes notice that they not only suffer from the disorder, but also try to live in their own way in this distress. For example, young people with social withdrawal don't merely escape from society. They are originally so delicate that they adopt withdrawal as a measure to protect themselves. Many young people overeat because they cannot find outlets to relieve stress. This inappropriate behavior is a disorder in which they attempt to cope with their situation. Thus, their attitude of living creativity is expressed as symptoms of psychiatric disorders. The main theme of this international workshop is what is creativity. Today, I'd like to discuss creativity from my viewpoint as a psychiatrist. Here, I wish to evaluate dissociative disorders that have been increasingly diagnosed mainly in the young and in recent years, and attracting considerable attention in not only the psychiatric field, but also in society in general. As I mentioned above, that each psychiatric symptom involves creativity. There is a particularly important association between the phenomenon dissociation and creative activity. In this presentation, I'd like to discuss the creativity within our activities by evaluating the psychological phenomenon dissociation. I'd like to briefly explain about dissociative disorder. Although this pathological condition has been known for a long time, its essence is difficult to clarify even by current psychiatry. My following explanation about this disorder will include my original opinions, but I'll state the points on which no consensus has been reached among specialists every time I talk about them. First, I should explain what dissociation is. Dissociation indicates various mental and physical disorders such as a loss of memory during a certain time periods in the past, despite no abnormalities in the brain or body, loss of consciousness with convulsion, behavior controlled by alternating personality states, or paralysis of the four extremities. These states can be summarized as the condition in which personality integration is difficult. As this definition is too vague, the diagnostic criteria frequently used in psychiatry should be shown. At present, the ICD-10 of the WHO's criteria and DSM-4 of the American Psychiatric Association are mainly used in the psychiatric field. The diagnostic criteria of dissociative disorders shown by the ICD-10 are as follows. A partial or complete loss of the normal integration between memories of the past, awareness of identity and immediate sensations, and control of bodily movements. These criteria are very complicated. I explained that dissociation is the condition in which personality integration is difficult, and the ICD-10 shows its complete contents. A partial or complete loss of the normal integration between memories of the past indicates a loss of memory, as is observed in amnesia. That of the awareness of identity indicates a blurred sense of self. That of immediate sensation means the paralysis of sensation. And that of the control of bodily movements represents difficulty in smooth body movements due to a lack of controlling strength. In the item Dissociative disorder of the DSM-4 in the US, it is agreed that dissociative symptoms refer to only mental ones and don't include a partial or complete loss of the normal integration of the control of bodily movements. According to the diagnostic criteria in the US, disorder characterized mainly by such physical symptoms is termed conversion disorder. Irrespective of mental or physical symptoms, such an impairment of personality integration had been termed hysteria. For your concrete understanding of the reason why the term hysteria has been changed to dissociative disorder, I'll talk about the history of hysteria next. The term hysteria was already used in documents in ancient Egypt in the 20th century BC. In this period, many diseases observed in females were considered to be due to the upward movement of the uterus, which is called the uterus suffocation theory. And the term hysteria was derived from the term uterus, hysteria in Greek. In the 4th century BC, Hippocrates systematized medicine as a science, following the view in ancient Egypt. During this period, a disease inducing respiratory arrest, loss of consciousness, or coma without physical problems was known. Since this disease mainly affected females, Hippocrates explained that this disease is a female's disease due to uterine movement in the body. Since this period until recently, it has been commonly accepted in the medical field such a pathologic condition is specific to females and associated with disturbances of the uterus. In the Middle Age, from the 5th to 14th century, a religious interpretation was added to hysteria. Physical symptoms, hysteria such as anesthesia, paralysis, and contracture were considered to be signs of possession by the devil. These symptoms were called stigma and detested. Many patients with hysteria are considered to have been victims of witch hunts. In France, in the 18th century, Mesmer popularized mesmerism, in which diseases are cured by improving the balance of animal magnetism in the body. Diseases were cured only after Mesmer touched the body of patients. At present, it is speculated that many of these patients were those with hysteria. Mesmer is considered to have induced personality alteration by changing animal magnetism. From the end of the 18th century, cases of multiple personality disorder began to be reported in medicine. From the end of the 19th to the beginning of the 20th century, various attempts to establish theories about hysteria were made in Europe. The representative scientists include Charcot, who was the first to deal with hysteria as a theme in medicine, Janet, who proposed the concept of dissociation, noting multiple personality states, Freud, who developed psychoanalysis as a treatment method, inferring the existence of unconsciousness, and Kretschmer, who explained hysteria based on thanatosis as animal behavior. However, from the 1930s to 1970s, studies on hysteria declined. This was partly because a suspicion arose that scientists unconsciously created symptoms by giving suggestions when studying patients with hysteria. In other words, there was a suspicion that hysteria was not a real disease. In association with this suspicion, patients with hysteria began to be criticized that their disease was a histrionic disease to attract others' attention. Histrionic disease to attract others' attention, close to malingering. In this situation, psychiatrists' attention began to be directed from hysteria to schizophrenia, which may also be a reason for the decline of studies on hysteria. However, in the 1970s, hysteria began to attract attention in the US. One reason was that symptoms of hysteria were observed in many soldiers returning from the Vietnam War, becoming a social issue. Another reason was that the high incidence of hysteria in survivors of child abuse attracted social attention during the rise of the feminist movement. However, since then, the term hysteria, giving a negative image, was deliberately avoided, and the term dissociation began to be preferred. After the 1980s, in psychiatry, multiple personality disorder began to attract attention. The disease name dissociative disorder was coined during this period. Discussion during this period was characterized by the following 3 points. One characteristic was that studies on dissociative disorder were performed as if it had been a pathological condition different from hysteria, not referring to classical hysteria. Another characteristic was that importance was attached to the association with actual psychiatric trauma. The other characteristic was that multiple personality disorder was considered to be the severest form of dissociative disorder. At present, revisions regarding the 3 points have been made. Studies began to be performed regarding dissociative disorder as a condition associated with conventional hysteria. Not all patients with dissociative disorder have traumatic experiences, and there were severe dissociative symptoms other than multiple personality. Thus, hysteria or dissociative disorder is still enigmatic and under discussion. Here, according to the current diagnostic criteria, pathological conditions classified as dissociative disorders will be briefly reviewed. Dissociative amnesia is memory loss during certain periods of time. Dissociative fugue is physical flight to far places without knowing it. Persons with this fugue, complicated by dissociative amnesia, occasionally live a new life as patients with amnesia. Dissociative identity disorder is so-called multiple personality disorder, which is an alteration of multiple personality states. Dissociative spore is the psychogenic loss of voluntary movement and responses. The personalization is a loss of the sense of personal identity and reality. The realization is a loss of the reality of the surrounding world, and trance and possession are half-dreaming states. In addition, according to changes in the physical condition, there are dissociative convulsion, dissociative disorders of movement, and dissociative disorders of sensation. Then, what understanding should we have of dissociative disorder as a pathological condition showing various symptoms? I'll talk mainly about my view, reviewing some cases. The first is a case of classical hysteria in female. She frequently had attacks of hyperventilation from her school days and began to often develop attacks of generalized convulsion when she was 25 years old. Close examination of the head showed no abnormalities, and she began to visit a psychiatric clinic when she was 27 years old. However, in the consultation room, generalized convulsion or back arching of the body, which is called opistotonus, occurred, and conversion was difficult. Conversation was difficult. Even when her worried parents visited her, she refused to meet them, but the reason was unclear even to her. At the age of 28 years, she often became excited, saying, "Someone enters my head," or any other, another me appears, which suggested personality alteration. She was excited during generalized conversion or personality alteration. However, after the attack, she looked as if nothing had happened. I dealt with her consistently in a supportive manner and promoted a realistic improvement in the living environment, and her condition gradually improved. The second case is amnesia of personal history. Patients with amnesia of personal history forget all about their past and have no idea of who they are. Not so many cases have been reported in Western countries. However, in Japan, many cases have been reported and many studies have been performed. This condition is commonly called general amnesia as the English term. However, since its incidence is particularly high in Japan, the Japanese term Zensei Katsushi Kenbo is sometimes used. One day, a man was found lying in a station of the Shinkansen service with no information regarding his name or address. Examination of the head showed no abnormalities, and he began to live with a temporary name and age, 30 years, given by the police. After 3 years, he heard the voice of God as an auditory hallucination and rode on a bicycle for about 100 kilometers according to the instructions of the voice, fell, and was found lying on the ground. He then began to visit the psychiatric department. He sometimes suddenly wished to die and set fire to his house in a burning state of mind, and was consequently hospitalized for some months. In addition, he often desired treatment on an inpatient basis due to confused thoughts. Further, he often lost any memory of several hours in which he appeared to have performed strange acts because a large sum of money was lost. There were bruises over his entire body, or electrical appliances not belonging to him were present in his room. His memory of the past didn't return. However, occupational training was performed to promote adaptation to society, and his psychological state gradually stabilized. This patient, as with the first patient, lost all memory of period when he set fire to his house or became confused and was living an unusual daily life as if nothing had happened. Therefore, in this case, there were two opposite sides, i.e., the ordinary normal state and unstable state, in which he started fires, became confused, and performed unaccountable acts. In the normal state, he was indifferent to others and aloof from the world. However, in the unstable state, his thoughts were confused and he cried out for help. In addition, in the normal state, he always lived realistically and materialistically and showed no affinity to arts or religion. In the unstable state, he heard the voice of God or repeatedly started fires, as if he had been churned by fire. What is the meaning of the two-sidedness of dissociative disorder? To clarify this meaning, I'll explain about the classification of dissociative symptoms. As I mentioned above, dissociation, according to the diagnostic criteria in the US, refers to only the psychological aspect, but that, according to the diagnostic criteria in Europe, includes both psychological and physical aspects. Therefore, in recent Europe, psychological dissociation began to be called psychoform dissociation, and physical dissociation, somatoform dissociation. However, when symptoms in patients with dissociative disorder are observed, there are many that cannot be readily classified as psychoform or somatoform. These symptoms include an abstract state of mind, agitation, attacks, loss of consciousness, generalized conversion, and opisthotonus. Let's call these symptoms primitive psychosomatic reactions. Temporarily, primitive psychosomatic reactions develop in the unstable state of the two sides of dissociative disorder, while symptoms of psychoform or somatoform dissociation, which are typical dissociative symptoms, develop in the normal state. Next, I will evaluate the state of patients with dissociative disorder in the normal state. It is rare that patients with dissociative disorder verbally speak about their own internal problems in the normal state because of their poor verbal expressions. They are indifferent to various symptoms in their unstable state as if they were others' affairs, have a negligible interest in matters around them, and dispassionately perform only what is before them at that time. Whether the contents of their conversation are true or false cannot be confirmed, and their verbalizations often give a false impression. People close to them try to communicate with these patients with dissociative disorder in vain, can't establish trusting relationship with them, and always have feelings of futility when with them. I'd like to give the term dissociation feelings to this specific sensation occurring in people who are close to patients with dissociative disorder and talk about them. Dissociation feelings in the people close to them indicate difficulty in emotional communication in patients with dissociative disorders, and also their feeling of detachment from their surrounding world. Patients with dissociative disorder have constant difficulty in perceiving the reality of their lives and feel detached from surrounding people and world. I'll talk about the other case of dissociative identity disorder, namely multiple personality disorder in a female. Her father had always been violent toward her mother since her early childhood. Her parents divorced when she was 14 years old, and she began to live with her mother. Subsequently, she began to refuse to go to school. From the age of 17 years, she showed symptoms such as transient amnesia, personality alteration, and wrist cutting. When she was 18 years old, she visited the psychiatric department due to having 23 personality states. Among these personality states, 2 or 3 were impulsive and aggressive, causing repeated self-injuries, attempted suicides, and violent acts against her mother. Each of these personality states is considered to have developed due to a specific traumatic experience during early childhood, such as observing her father's violence toward her mother or being left alone at home. These personality states were given fantastic names such as those of characters in animations, and their personality traits were very individual. The personalities included a very positive thinking good youth, shy and withdrawn girl, and an aggressive, destructive infant. Her personality isolation slowly decreased while she gradually organized her feelings toward her parents, and a feeling of calmness returned to her. When multiple personality states are present, as in this case, two-sidedness such as the above-mentioned hysteria and amnesia of personal history is inconspicuous. However, calm personality states are close to the above-mentioned normal state, and violent aggressive personality states are close to the unstable state. Thus, dissociative disorder originally has two sides, i.e., normal and unstable states. In multiple personality disorder, it is possible to consider that the appearance of various personality states prevents patients from developing a very painful, unstable states. Here, I'll summarize the process of the development of dissociative symptoms. Dissociative disorders have two sides. One is a normal dispassionate state, and one is a normal dispassionate state, and the other is an unstable state characterized by markedly confused thoughts. In the normal state, people around patients with dissociative disorders have dissociation feelings toward them, a futile feeling because communication with them fails. Such feelings in people around patients with dissociative disorder indicate the feelings of detachment from the surrounding world in these patients. In the unstable state, primitive psychosomatic reactions such as generalized convulsions and a loss of consciousness develop. Disorder showing this unstable state as the main symptom can be considered hysteria. The two-sidedness of dissociation has been suggested not only by me, but also by other specialists. Dissociative disorder is considered to be closely associated with a history of traumatic experience. Van der Hart, an authority in this field from Holland, described that the personality of patients with dissociative disorder associated with trauma splits into an emotional part of the personality, remembering the traumatic experience, and apparently normal part of the personality, absorbed in daily life, and various complicated dissociative symptoms develop from these parts. Here, I'd like to indicate only the presence of two-sidedness irrespective of the presence or absence of trauma in patients with dissociative disorder. The basis of dissociative disorders is the alternation of the two sides. To avoid a painful, unstable state, dissociative symptoms recently attracting attention, such as personality alteration, hallucination, and amnesia, are considered to develop. Patients with multiple personality disorder are more imaginative than those with hysteria, as was observed in the above introduced patient who gave fantastic names to each personality. These various dissociative symptoms may represent avoidance of the two-sidedness of dissociative disorders by patients' imagination or creativity. I have suggested the two-sidedness of dissociative disorders and explain the process of the development of various dissociative symptoms, recently attracting attention to avoid this two-sidedness. Next, I'd like to talk about the meaning of the formation of dissociative symptoms by patients with dissociative disorders. I explained at the beginning of this presentation that dissociation is a failure of personality integration. I'll evaluate in detail the meanings of individual dissociative symptoms. Psychoform dissociative symptoms, such as personality alteration, hallucination, and amnesia, can be considered a loss of the self-belonging of appearance, using more difficult terms. Somatoform dissociative symptoms, such as the absence of body movements or sensory paralysis, are considered a functional loss of the body as an experience medium. On the other hand, primitive psychosomatic reactions such as generalized convulsion can be expressed as confusion of the place of experience. Thus, all these dissociative symptoms may be summarized as a loss of the subjectivity in experiencing the world. A similar explanation may be possible for the experience of psychosis in schizophrenia. However, the difference between psychosis and dissociative disorder is the continuation of such experience in the former and transient repetition of this state in the latter. In other words, psychosis is a type of failure in brain function, but there is a possibility that a loss of subjectivity in experience the world in dissociative disorder has a certain meaning. The characteristic loss of subjectivity is experienced by patients with dissociative disorder themselves. In addition, people close to them don't know of their subjectivity. This loss is clearly indicated by personality alteration in patients with dissociative disorders. They look as if they had no self. There is another characteristic of patients with dissociative disorder. Some patients with dissociative disorder strongly refuse to see family members, particularly their parents, and some of them, even junior or high school students, leave home and begin to live alone. In the first classical case among these I introduced, this characteristic was clearly observed. The second case of amnesia of personal history may represent the most extreme avoidance of family members and the hometown. Dissociation feelings indicating a difficulty in emotional communication in patients with dissociative disorder can be regarded as a refusal to emotionally communicate with family members and others associated with the patients. Let's give the German term Heimat to the factor common to hometown, descent, parents, family, and emotional communication with others that may function in the background of all experiences. Patients with dissociative disorder consistently refuse Heimat in the normal state. However, in the unstable condition, dependence on others occurs and the wish for Heimat are observed. Therefore, dissociative disorder is a disease characterized by a repeated wish for and refusal of Heimat. Then, why is Heimat the main theme of dissociative disorders? When the element of Heimat is re-evaluated, Heimat is places, persons, and situations that conditionally accept and guarantee the existence of the person. In other words, Heimat is a factor as a basis of the self and allows the person to feel without reason, I can be present here. the fact that patients with dissociative disorder cannot feel subjectivity in their experience, and others also cannot know their subjectivity, indicates the attitude of discarding various elements in which the person can be subjectively involved. Patients with dissociative disorder may intuitively consider that the real meaning of their continuation of living is hidden within some part of self, if such a part remains as a result of discarding. In the center of dissociative disorder, there is such a question about self-existence. Briefly speaking, dissociative disorder is a disease involving asking the meaning of self-existence by approaches to and estrangement from Heimat as a base of self-existence. Among various dissociative symptoms, those such as personality alteration and auditory hallucination, in which the world different from that experienced by the daily self is experienced, are considered to be formed by a creative process in response to the question about the meaning of self-existence. Then, what is creativity in dissociation as a psychological phenomenon? Rosemary Gordon, a young psychoanalyst based in Great Britain, discussed creative activities in humans in the book Dying and Creating, and showed 4 stages of the creative processes. Sorry, I spent too much time at more 10 minutes, please. The first stage is the preparatory stage. Here, people face problems, are absorbed in them, and make all efforts to solve them. In this stage, the conscious self works to the maximum recruiting knowledge and skills. Thus, in this stage, people try to solve problems they face by reason which they are aware. The second stage is that of confinement, which is a state in which everything is jumbled and pending. People become aware of having come up against a wall, and as a result, give up trying to solve the problem, avoid it, or try not to mind it. However, actually, they are overcome and confused by their failure to solve the problem. They doubt everything, suffer from everything, worry and despair. However, seeds of creativity take root in this confinement stage, which may also be called creative emptiness. When people have good luck, the third stage suddenly appears from an unexpected place. The third stage is an inspiration or revelation stage. Suddenly, a certain idea occurs to them. People cannot expect them, and it occurs suddenly. Creative emptiness is filled suddenly and instantly, as if it were God's grace, when people experience brooding joy and ecstasy. If people float in the air, feeling God's grace in the third stage, they came back to earth in the fourth stage, the stage of verification. Various concepts received by inspiration were examined, organized, and given appropriate expression. This evaluation of the creative process suggests that creativity is the ability to use ego function while abandoning it. People transiently discover themselves experiencing ecstasy, but return to reality. Gordon described that marked mutual dependency of active-passive attitude, self-control, abandonment, and consciousness appears in the creative process. The creative process described by Gordon is a process in which people face a certain problem, are distressed in trying to solve it, enter a state separated from reality, and create a new reality. This process resembles the process of the formation of the symptoms in dissociative disorders we have discussed. The similarities between dissociation and the creative process are as follows. The state of living a realistic life corresponds to the normal state, which is apparently adaptive living, and the apparently normal part of personality described by Van der Hart, and the state of ecstasy separated from reality corresponds to the unstable state, characterized by primitive psychosomatic reactions and the emotional part of personality described by Van der Hart. In the creative process, facing a problem corresponds to a suddenly developing and unexpected situation that can induce this dissociation and pathologically correspond to a traumatic experience in the past. In the second stage of Gordon's creative process, people are cornered due to a difficulty in solving a problem and placed in an extreme situation and unconsciously ask themselves the meaning of their own existence in this distress. In the third stage, they enter a state of ecstasy in which the ego border is unblurred. In this stage, Heimat, as a theme observed in dissociative disorder, is hidden. Let's consider the dissociative process as a pathological condition that develops because humans are living creatures. I consider that there are creatures' responses as a base of dissociation. I'll explain more. Humans as well as other creatures live, adapting to their environment in the normal state. This environment is a reality for humans. At every moment, humans live, referring to the previous reality and predicting the next one. Here, if unpredictable situations occur, for example, a person's house suddenly disappears, food that should be there disappears, or a person is attacked, she may feel a crisis of existence. Some people may develop convulsions or become rigid, transiently discontinuing biological responses and behave as if they were dead. Others may show confused speech and behavior as if they were delirious. Subsequently, when trivial and unpredictable situations occur, they readily develop such a confused state. However, after a certain time, they live as if nothing had happened. Thus, a confused, unstable state alternates with an apparently normal one, which is the biphasic nature of dissociation. However, the confused, unstable state states that present the question of self-existence is a very painful condition for people. Therefore, to avoid this ultimate question, they create a new reality using their imagination. For example, they vividly imagine that they live in a wonderful house, many delicious dishes are arranging on the table, or they became strong or defeat an enemy. Symptoms thus formed lead to multiple personalities. Therefore, dissociation is a defense mechanism to avoid the crisis of self-existence. In the crisis of self-existence, people are placed in a chaotic situation and enter an imaginary world as if it were God's grace, letting the crisis go past. Of course, dissociative disorder is a disease and its experience must be painful to patients. However, it is likely that dissociation as a psychological state is associated with creative activities. Our creative activities involve healthy dissociation. As I have mentioned, the question about the meaning of self-existence is hidden in dissociative symptoms. In other words, the situation in which a certain new thing is created in the phase presenting the question about the meaning of self-existence in distress of living itself may be our creativity. Thank you very much.